let's get to what tonight's program is about. And that is the legislators from LD18. On the left, you see Priya Sundareshan. Priya has represented LD18 since 2023, and she currently sits on the Elections, Government, and Natural Resources Committee. She teaches natural resources law at the University of Arizona, and she's a voting rights activist, and she's led voter protection efforts and engagement on redistricting within the Arizona Democratic Party. And right there in the center is State Representative Chris Mathis. Chris is an elder law attorney, also a teacher at the University of Arizona. He teaches healthcare law. He was also elected in 2022 to the Arizona House. He was first appointed, but now he is in his first elected term. And he practices elder law and can be very helpful to our senior citizens in very many ways. And then finally, rounding out this terrific trio is Representative Nancy Gutierrez on the right there. She was elected in 2022 as well, and she is now the Democratic Minority Whip in the State House. She's on the Education Committee, she's a ranking member of the Regulatory Affairs Committee, and she's been teaching at Tucson High since 2013. And Nancy is known for advocating for public schools, teachers, and students, and she fights for reproductive freedom, LGBTQ rights, and sensible gun legislation. So let me stop sharing. We have the three best legislators in Arizona. You know, we are so fortunate to have them, and we are going to re-elect them and make sure we have them for years and years to come. And with that, we haven't really sort of discussed any particular order, but why don't each of you speak for about 10 minutes. And then when we get around to 6:30 or so, we can open it up for questions. So with that, who would like to go first? How about you, Nancy or Chris?
Larry,
Sure.
I would nominate our newly elected minority whip to begin.
All right.
Thanks.
Go for it, Nancy.
Thanks so much. I want to say that Priya is coming. She is participating in a Senate retreat today, and it's going a little bit longer than she expected. So she'll be joining us as soon as she can. So thanks for having us. I'm thrilled to be here with you all. I want to start by just thanking Democrats of Greater Tucson because all last year you all provided so many period products to Tucson High where I teach, and that enabled us to really just fill our back stock so that the PE and yoga teachers didn't have to keep spending all of our own money on those things. So it is so greatly appreciated. We did pass in the budget, well, I shouldn't say we, in the budget, there was $2 million allotted to buying period products for middle through high schoolers. And I will be, I'm going to be checking up on that this week because we are running low. So I want that money to provide that. But thanks for the great introduction, Larry, and for just supporting us in such a very tremendous way. It's really, really appreciated. So this session was our first session, my first session, and it was the longest in history. So, you know, that's about right. Our first day back, or I'm sorry, my first day back to school was Monday, July 31st, and that was our last day in the legislature. So I split my time that day, went to school for a couple hours, and then drove to Phoenix, and we ended our session. You know, we've talked about this session a lot, and the truth is that we had about 8 bills that were Dem bills passed, and some of them were really great, and some of them were date changes, which is still okay. But there wasn't a lot of bipartisanship happening. We are really focused on flipping our legislature so that we can have much more dynamic bills and our bills seen. During the interim, I am back to teaching at Tucson High, and I didn't know that it was going to be this busy in the interim. So I am working until 2 o'clock every day, and then meeting with constituents and stakeholders, meeting with the governor's team every other week with our Democratic leadership team. And this Wednesday, I'm going to Phoenix to participate in the first ESA voucher ad hoc committee meeting from 2 to 4 in the House. So that will be mostly performative. I'm thinking it's going to be myself, Representative Schwiebert, and then Speaker Tom Horn, and a couple of their representatives, ESA voucher representatives who work with the Goldwater Institute. And so we are expecting that there will be a lot of propaganda shown as fact, and we are preparing to meet those propaganda facts with actual real facts, which say that the folks who are getting the benefit of the ESA vouchers are mostly kids who have never been in the public school system. Still, over 80% of Arizona families choose public schools. And these vouchers are going to amount, it's estimated to be a $900 million expense for our state, which we could use many other places. So our goal this year in working with the governor will be to put a cap on those vouchers, and or maybe even a moratorium, so that we can get the real data instead of the propaganda data that we've been seeing. Let's see. It seems like so long ago that we were in the House. I was elected to leadership, and I'm really happy to represent Southern Arizona on our leadership team. We lost Andres Cano as our leader. He's now at Harvard, which is very exciting, but that's what caused the shift. So to be a freshman on leadership, I just feel that's a huge honor. And I'm getting to learn a lot more than I even had learned. So moving forward, the three of us in LD18, if we don't have a primary, we are really hoping to focus on LD17 and helping those folks, our candidates in that area, which are Morgan Abraham for the House and Amy Fitch for the Senate. We want to knock a lot of doors for them to hopefully flip that seat. And we'll also be helping in LD16, our colleague Keith Seaman, who I think I saw was on earlier. We want him to keep his seat because he's been just wonderful to work with and huge advocate for public schools as well. I think that'll be my time for now. I'd rather answer questions. So I'll let Chris have his turn, and then we can maybe do some questions.
Great. Gosh, thank you very much, Nancy. And thank you, Larry and Mike and Joe and everybody else who's on the call. We're so fortunate in Tucson to have DGT and to have these weekly meetings. And Larry, you said some very kind things about those of us in the delegation, but I think our view is that we really do have the best LD in the state as far as in all kinds of ways, but I think in particular with the PCs and DGT members, and we just have such interest and focus on the issues, and also focus on getting us not just reelected, but getting us into the majority. So we view ourselves as quite fortunate. And when we talk to our colleagues and we talk about the number of folks who join these calls and who join our LD18 PC calls, they can't imagine it, because we just have such great engagement. So thank you to everybody for being on the call. Nancy covered so much of it, and I'd also initially like to just give a shout out to Nancy. I think it's a testament to what a great job she has done in her first session, and a testament to the esteem in which she's held by our caucus, that she, as a freshman, was elected to leadership. As she said, we have big shoes to fill with Andres Cano leaving and going off to graduate school. Hopefully he will come back, but for this year, he's going to be gone. And Nancy has done a super job and really hit the ground running. It's so important that we have somebody at the leadership table from Southern Arizona. And Andres was doing a terrific job at that. And one of the great aspects of that we were able to stress in the leadership election is that in addition to all of Nancy's other great characteristics, she is a fierce advocate for Southern Arizona. And to have her at the table meeting with our stakeholders, but also in the governor's meetings every couple of weeks is a huge deal. So we're delighted to have her, and it is my honor to serve with both Nancy and Priya, who has also done a terrific job as a freshman and really taken some great leadership role, not a formal leadership role, but a functional leadership role in the Senate. And that's, I think, where she is right now, is helping lead at their Senate retreat. I think she's going to be out pretty soon, so she'll be joining us. As I said, Nancy covered so much. I think that, and I know we'll be answering questions, but just from my perspective, I was also a member. I was appointed in December 2021, so I was a member not just this past session, but the session before. And some of the is one of the things that I have noticed, which is sort of counterintuitive, given the fact that in that first session we had a Republican governor. Now we're delighted to have a Democratic governor, Katie Hobbs. Is that a lot of the legislation that was passed or was discussed this past session turned out to be more partisan from the Republican perspective, and the Republicans were less inclined, not more inclined with the Democratic governor, but less inclined to compromise or get into any aspects of nuance that, of course, is a big part of what is supposed to be the legislative process. So we had sort of two sets of kinds of bills, two buckets. We either had bills that were so non-controversial that everybody in the legislature voted for them, and you can imagine with the current crop of Republicans what that means. And so there are, those are not that they weren't good bills, not that they aren't valuable bills. Government does still function. You still have bills that are just policies that have been around for a while that there's broad agreement on. You have bills that a legislator happens to be speaking with a constituent and gets an idea to introduce, and every once in a while those get passed. As Nancy said, we had a handful of Democratic bills that passed this last session, but it has just been it was in some ways surprising that the majority was, I think, even more strident than they had been under Governor Ducey, because I think one of the things they knew, at least the ones that kind of the more responsible ones among them, is that this stuff, if these bills get a hearing in committee and they get voted out and they pass on the floor and get signed by the governor, they're actually going to become law. And so in a way, I think the Republicans viewed this session as they had all these free passes to pass these super extreme bills, many of which are sort of lead the nation in how extreme they are and how cutting edge they are. And they knew they'd get vetoed. So they sort of get the points, political points for passing them, but didn't have to live with the consequences. So that was just something that I bring up when I compare the two sessions, because it is a bit counterintuitive, at least the sort of version that we learned in grade school is that when you have the executive branch of one party and the legislature of another, that's supposed to be an incentive to compromise. I think that's the notion that this form of government is founded on. That isn't quite what happened this time around. I think we're both hopeful that next session, maybe the Republicans got at least some of this out of their system, and that there'll be a little bit more incentive to compromise. As Nancy said, that one of the big kind of positive aspect that we see when we look at the political situation and the way that the lines were drawn last time and the way the districts currently are in Arizona is that we have what we think is literally the best chance since the 1960s to flip the legislature, to flip the House. In particular, the House has been, and I didn't realize this when I first started looking into this stuff, and some of you may know this, but again, I didn't know this. It's literally since the 1960s, the House has been in Republican control, and in Arizona, and so it has just been Democrats have not controlled the House in all of that time, and we are in this next cycle, 2024, as close as we've ever been to flipping the legislature. As Nancy said, the seat up in LD18, as far as the House goes, both House and Senate, but just since we're talking about the House, we have a terrific chance to flip that seat with Morgan Abraham as a single shot. We can talk about that a little bit. Sometimes people are concerned that if we're not running two candidates, that's problematic. We think that in this case, running one is going to be the way to flip one of those seats. And there are other districts in the state that we hope to get back, that we should, under a normal cycle, be able to flip those seats as well. So that would get us to 31, and that's a huge deal because we can actually pass good bills instead of relying on Governor Hobbs to veto all of the bad bills. So that's I guess my opening remarks, and happy to answer questions, and really appreciate the forum and everybody being here.
Hi, Nancy. This is Janice Eagle-Stormat. I met you at Environmental Days at the Capitol.
Yes.
Congratulations on being whipped. But I
Thank
also
you.
wanted to ask you, we had invited you to come to Watershed Management Group for a tour of Watershed Management Group, and you had suggested possibly you could get some people on the other side to come with you. Is there any chance of that still happening?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, it's always hard. I think we were going to do that during the interim. I don't know. I'm sure that my assistant Zachary had reached out to try to do that, and I don't think we could get it scheduled.
We didn't hear back from you, but yeah.
Maybe we were reaching out to the wrong person, because that is definitely something I wanted to do and talked to the caucus about, the Southern Arizona caucus. So yes, I still want to do that. I'm sure some of my colleagues are very interested in that. So maybe if you drop or email me your email address again, we can start working on that, because I absolutely want to see that.
Me
So
too.
appreciate you being, yeah. Because really rainwater harvesting is such a big
Absolutely
conservation tool, and they don't seem to be doing it enough in Phoenix.
No, Chris and I and Priya, we always are talking about how Tucson is ahead of the game and the leader in conservation efforts. So it would be great to be able to get some of our Phoenix colleagues down to Tucson as well. So yes, please.
Thank you
Definitely
so much.
want to do that. You bet.
Okay, Mike Bryant has a question. Mike, go right ahead.
I do notice that Priya just arrived.
Okay.
So I'm going to add her to the spotlight here. Hi, Priya. So we got a little report on how Chris and Nancy felt about this session, about, maybe some major wins for Dems, maybe some things that we, fortunately were able to stop this session. And we wanted to get your perspective from the Senate side before we move forward with any questions. So Priya, the floor is yours.
Okay. I'm sorry I missed Chris and Nancy's perspectives, but I'm sure it was very similar. I think we've generally felt and been in sync on a lot of these issues, and we've recognized that being in the minority doesn't help us be able to achieve a lot of what we have hoped to. And so it's it's been frustrating, especially when, we've come in and we've introduced a number of bills that we knew we were interested in seeing go forward, that we know there are some things that need to be fixed in Arizona policy, vouchers, water issues, so many. I mean, reproductive rights, repealing a lot of the preemptions that we have. And so it's, it's been frustrating that we came in, we spent a bit of time trying to think about what bills we wanted to introduce were, going around trying to get some co-sponsors on those as well, and then to introduce them and for the most part see that they weren't going to get scheduled for even a committee hearing, because that's what the Republicans do in the majority, is they don't hear our bills. And so then it was a lot of defense. I think a lot of you know, I sat on the elections committee, on the government committee, and natural resources committee, where I was ranking member. And to varying degrees, it was just a lot of no, and making sure that we spoke up against the terrible ideas we were hearing. And that's especially true on the election side. We were seeing a lot of bills coming through that were based on conspiracy theory and intent on rolling back voting rights even further, because we know we've already seen a few of those bills that got signed into law under Governor Ducey over the last couple of years. And so thankfully, Governor Hobbs was good on vetoing all of the bills that came through the elections committee that were rolling back those rights. The government committee was almost more frustrating, because the elections committee, crazy as every bill was also kind of easy to poke fun at because they were based on conspiracy theory. The government committee, run by Senator Jake Hoffman, was almost more evil, and it was kind of the grab bag of everything else. You've got COVID denial, vaccine exemptions, gun issues, and then I think most disconcertingly, the attacks on the school for deaf and blind, which came through in the Senate committee, and the chair, Senator Jake Hoffman, sponsored the amendment to reduce the continuation of the school for deaf and blind just down to 2 years, which is crazy. That's not the norm for these general agency reauthorization bills that are, the default is 8 years. And only if there's like a good reason to mess with that, are you really going to dig in? And certainly the school for deaf and blind didn't have any major issues that justified that. And so, and that's something that I will continue to talk about, because how can you possibly attack the school for deaf and blind? Like, these are children who are being served by an important educational need, in particular, teachers who are committed to serving the deaf-blind children. Like, there are particular skills that this agency offers and that impacts our own community in Tucson, because the school for deaf and blind has their the residential facility here. And so it was just mind-boggling that they would open themselves up to attacking this, this community that way. So I will keep talking about that as much as I possibly can over the next over the next campaign cycle, because how could you possibly attack that community? And that was just an emotional issue for us. We were putting it all on the table to try to undo that effort to restrict it to 2 years. We were trying to open it, to reauthorize it back to the full 8 years or even 10 years, because they were doing the community and the school was doing everything they could to address whatever issues the Auditor General found. So the government committee was really tough. And then Natural Resources Committee, I was the ranking member on, which I was very appreciative of and was able to bring some of my skills to bear. But of course, we didn't hear Democratic bills in that committee. And so, it was, again, a lot of defense on bills that were, there were some bills that we supported too. There were some small, bills that were addressing some minor issues in our water management that had they gone forward, could have fixed some issues, and unfortunately, even those didn't make their way all the way through. But certainly none of our ideas that would really, kind of take a big picture lens at our water issues or climate issues were getting heard at all. So so a lot of frustration in the bills heard. And then of course, I'm sure Chris and Nancy spoke about the budget process, which was also frustrating too.
Actually, we didn't get much into that. Let me go ahead and spotlight the three legislators here. And where's Chris? There's Chris. And ask you all three to weigh in on sort of the biggest duel or the biggest win or loss in your respective committees that you were able to see that maybe all the other members who weren't in your committee didn't see, that you want to tell us about.
Since I have the unmute on, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so leaving budget aside, I guess through my committee, I think the biggest win was defeating a bill that sought to, there was a bill that was introduced through the Natural Resources Committee, and we were able to vote it down on the Senate floor. So the House didn't even see this one, thankfully. But it was a bill that was going to try to enshrine the old renewable portfolio standards from 2006 into statute going forward forever, which our utilities have long since blown past those old renewable portfolio standards. So it was a win that we weren't putting these really old and outdated standards into law, and thankfully it died on the Senate floor.
Nancy, you want to go next?
Sure. I would say a win was in regulatory affairs. Actually, there was a bill that was really for the tobacco industry that would have allowed more tobacco products and less regulation. And we managed to have that not pass out of committee. And it was tough, and they wanted revotes, and it got really interesting. But luckily, we had some great help from the Cancer Association and Heart Association helping us. Some of their bills are very sneaky, and it looks like, oh, this will be so great for kids to not be, exposed to nicotine. And really, it's the exact opposite. So that was a win when we came together bipartisanly, and if that's a word, and stopped that. I would say the losses were more in the Education Committee. They were the gun issues, having guns on campus, having guns on college campuses. Those all passed and luckily were vetoed by our governor. Also, the anti-trans bathroom bills were passed out of committee, and the anti-pronoun bills were passed out of committee. It was great to be able to stand up against them and speak against them and give my personal experience that I have in everyday classroom daily teaching. So I was proud to stand up against them, but unfortunately they made it through committee and through the House floor and were passed. But thank goodness for Katie Hobbs and her 143 vetoes this year, because she let me sleep at night, to be honest, because they were hideous, horrible bills. So,
Chris, how about you?
Yeah, and that's the biggest kind of overall win that I think we all experienced in committee this year was just as Nancy was saying. So last year I served on the Judiciary Committee. I wasn't on Judiciary this past year, but all of these terrible bills to make sentences tougher for every crime that you can imagine, and even some that you didn't weren't on the books before, would pass and they would get signed, and all of the awful bills about picking on trans kids bills and those kinds of bills. Last year they go through Jude, they'd get out of committee, they get to the floor, they'd pass, and Governor Ducey signed them. this past year, we knew that those bills were going to get vetoed. And it's a really big deal, just kind of going to work every day, knowing that in addition to sort of all the other aspects of the job and the sort of, as Priya mentioned, the defense that we play, that we at least don't feel like we are there kind of being a part of catastrophic legislation that's going to become statute. It's just that was a really big deal. I think as far as a specific win, the last year, as I said, last year I was on judiciary. I wanted to switch to the healthcare committee, the HHS committee, and we were able to do that. And we had a few good bills that went through there. One that's kind of my favorite bill that we did this past year is a bill that was one of our colleagues in the Phoenix area is Dr. Amish Shaw, and Amish is an ER doc, and he ran a bill to add a preventative dental benefit to access to Medicaid. And this is Medicaid is, as I'm sure most of you know, is something that has for really since the 1960s been Republicans have often been hostile to, and certainly hostile to expanding it. This was a case where if you looked at the cost per beneficiary of adding this preventative dental benefit, it literally was a couple dollars per year per beneficiary. So very low cost. And if you look at the potential savings, it's a multiple of that, in addition to making the lives of the beneficiaries better because of better dental hygiene and preventing downstream healthcare issues. So that was I think a good, an excellent bill. We were able to pass it out of committee. It passed on the floor. I think it even passed, Priya may recall, in the Senate, but it ultimately did not become law. And this was, I think, another one that we all had some frustration over the way the budget process worked this past year, to understate. And that was one that it was just sort of mystifying that it wasn't included in the budget and didn't become law. Anyway, though, great bill. And I think when we'll have another pass at it next year, and hopefully we'll be able to get it put in statute. So that was a win for access beneficiaries out of HHS.
Well, that segues us very much into my next panel question, which is, I'd like to get your all's view of the budget process and any of the big wins that we had in the budget and any difficulties we had during the conferencing of that between the governor and the legislature that you weren't quite satisfied with. So let's go ahead and lead off reverse order. Chris, why don't you go first?
Well, I think the biggest win was the $150 million in the Housing Trust Fund. Again, as I'm sure all of you know, we have a severe housing problem in the state of Arizona. And I think the more information that we learned about the various housing issues, the more and more concerned we became over how severe that issue is. And we were able to, largely through Democratic efforts, largely through sort of the Democratic legislative pot of money that we had, get that $150 million put into the Housing Trust Fund, which was a huge deal. So that was, in my view, the biggest win. As I said, I think that we all had shared frustration in the way that the budget process played out. Nancy mentioned earlier, touched on it's just hard. It's hard to pick one, but if you had to pick one, the biggest frustration, I think, was the failure to do any meaningful thing. The one thing we did do is the committee that Nancy is going to be a member of this coming week with sounds like a really fun bunch of folks. She's going to get
super fun.
But it had to do with doing anything to rein in these vouchers, which the session before this past one, my first session, were massively expanded. And the situation pretty much is that now in Arizona, and again, we're leading edge in the country on this. We give tax dollars to with no means tests, I think virtually it sounds like the more we learn about it, and Nancy can speak better to this, no vet, largely to parents whose kids were already going to private schools to help them go to private schools. And of course, that money comes directly out of the budget and functionally comes directly out of the public school budget. When this was when the Republicans proposed this a couple of years ago, they said that they thought it would cost about $30 million a year. Well, it's going to cost almost $1 billion a year with a B. And $1 billion is a pretty big deal in the Arizona state budget. And so, so the fact that we weren't able to do anything to rein that in the program, the information has gotten sort of worse and worse as far as the cost of the program. But at the time we voted on the budget, we had a pretty good idea that it was going to be, if not $1 billion, it was going to cost, I can't remember the exact figure, but 600 or 700 million or something like that. And there was just really very little fight made once we got past February on that. And and of course, that's something that is not going away. It's going to be a huge problem in our budgetary, in the budget next year. And so that was a big frustration. I think perhaps the kind of marquee reason that we all voted against the budget, but that's those are kind of two big ones budget wise. Nancy?
Yeah, I would say that for sure. I was frustrated with how the budget was negotiated because Democrats were left pretty much in the dark until the very end, when our leadership was able to negotiate at the last minute. And they did negotiate more money for the Housing Trust Fund, but it wasn't enough overall. You can see when you look at the budget, there's so much pork for our Republican folks. You know, what was it, 40 million for the Prescott Rodeo or some ungodly amount, $10 million for Tom Horn to be able to advertise against public schools and for ESA vouchers. Unacceptable. And I entered 2 amendments on the floor to the budget, and what about the ESA vouchers. One was to cap the money that we spent on ESA vouchers. The other one was to put a moratorium until we could find out what was actually happening. And they were both turned down, not even able to vote on, really. And that was disappointing. And it's one of the things that when I joined leadership, I expressed to Governor Hobbs's team. And you know, I figured that since I have that opportunity and that voice, I'm going to use it to my greatest advantage. So we're hopeful that that won't happen again. We've said in no uncertain terms that that can't happen again. We should be the ones putting together the budget and then giving it to them to work out. And we certainly don't need to compromise on a budget in May. And that's when I think we did it. We had plenty of time to negotiate. So hopefully that will be a different scenario. But, you know, Housing Trust Fund was great. Promise Program got $20 million. Education did get some one-time funds. But again, all of those bumps are one-time monies. We will not have those monies for next year. And if the voucher program does spend $900 million, we will actually have to make cuts to next year's budget. And I am not prepared to cut any of our democratic values in the budget. So, you know, they will have to not have their pork pet projects. That's for darn sure. They had pet pork projects. The Democrats pooled our money so that we could get the money for housing, for education, for, you know, all the things that Democrats want. We were not selfish. And wanted to pool our money. So, I mean, it was good that most of us held to that and decided that the greater good was the greater good. So that was my experience for the budget. Onward and upward.
Good old-fashioned pork barrel log rolling on the Republican side. Senator, is it safe for you to unmute and make your comments? Are you in a good place?
I think so. I'm about to get on the highway. Okay. Yeah, no, everything that Nancy and Chris said, it's okay. Got a green light. Yeah, everything Nancy and Chris says, absolutely 100% I agree with. There were some good things in this budget, and it was purely a consequence of us having the governor to begin with, and then later on, because our Democratic leadership and our Democratic members said we have important things that need to be funded that were left out of the individual bribing that occurred with all of these Republican members. And so that's really where the frustrations were. We felt like we could have achieved a lot more had we included us in the first place. And and so we're hoping going forward that the governor, does make sure to negotiate with us ahead of time, and that everyone is confident to do that. But unfortunately, we're facing, and I just came from my Senate Democrat. Sorry, yeah, I'm driving because we just heard, though, that the revenue projections are terrible. We're going to have no new funding, and it is, our opportunity to do good things with resources was last year, and now we don't have that anymore. So we're entering a more grim situation next year, budget wise.
Right. I've got some more questions from the participants here. So Larry, you want to go ahead and direct that questioning?
Sure. Let me start with Lillian Fox. You're unmuted. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, we always hear about what the senator or what our governor has vetoed, but we hear virtually nothing from what you do about what you're doing. Are you going to hold some town halls? Are there some reporters or media people who are talking to you who we ought to follow in order to learn more about what you're doing and what the problems are?
I can answer that one. The three of us have done 2 coffee with constituents in the past few months, so we intend on continuing to do that. We're always happy to do town hall types of things because we want our folks to know what's going on. All 3 of us also have newsletters that we try to keep up on, and so we can definitely put you all on those. Social media, we're all on social media, and we give lots of good updates. I would say to watch, I would just say follow, let's see, who do we follow that's really, well, Democrats of Greater Tucson. LD18 is wonderful at putting out information. So Larry, is this true that even if they are not in LD18, they could subscribe to LD18's newsletter? Is that correct?
Oh, yes, by all means. The more the merrier.
Yeah, there's always fantastic information there. And then whatever your issue is that you're most passionate about, whether it's education or the environment, Sierra Club has its own newsletters, but yeah, we try to be as communicative as possible. What else do we do, Chris? Or who's a good person to listen to, follow, or watch?
I think that a couple, I think there's you can subscribe, but you don't have to subscribe. A couple good sources are an entity called the Arizona Agenda, which is some folks who have been reporters up in the Capitol, up in Phoenix for a while, and they put out, I think, a daily during the week email that comes out first thing in the morning. There's also, which I think is even better, there's now something called Tucson Agenda. So the Arizona Agenda folks started this entity called Tucson Agenda, and it's Kurt Pendergast and others, former Arizona Daily Star folks, who are just doing a super job. And they will address various Southern Arizona issues, not always things that are going on in the legislature, but I think they're doing a great job. So I would highly recommend both of those sources.
Let me just introduce a plug there. We had both Hank and Neil with us for Tucson Agenda and Arizona Agenda last week. So that's in our back catalog at dgt.org, the dgt.org. And there's discount codes for both Tucson Agenda and Arizona Agenda available on Blog for Arizona right now. I have a post up about that with those codes. So please go ahead and do that. And, I'm kind of hurt a little bit that none of you mentioned Blog for Arizona.
Well, I think it goes without saying, Mike, that
Exactly.
the preeminent source.
Yes.
Another good one that you may not know about is some of the reporters up at the Arizona Republic have a podcast called The Gaggle, which comes out, I think, weekly or more or less weekly, which is usually quite good and kind of goes a little bit more in depth than some of the coverage that we see. I think one of our shared frustrations is sometimes the way the legislature is covered in the paper, in the Arizona Daily Star, is you'll get these articles that will be sort of the crazy bill of the day article, and it will be, here's the crazy bill, here's the crazy Republican legislator that's running it, here's what the Democrats say, here's what somebody else says, and then you sort of go on to the next article. And those can be helpful to get stuff on our radar screen, but I feel like they don't provide the context that they might, and it's frustrating that there aren't more articles in the paper that go into some of the other legislative stuff that we're working on.
Indivisible Tucson is
Go
also
ahead.
a great one. Indivisible Tucson does a great weekly roundup.
Oh yeah, that reminds me. So yeah, I was gonna say that my Twitter, I can keep very up to date about what's the latest in terms of like my thinking and what I'm seeing as good reporting as well. And then Nancy reminded me of Civic Engagement Beyond Voting, which during session has a really good weekly roundup of what's happening at the Capitol.
Yes, I'm glad you remembered that one. It was stuck in my brain. I couldn't get it out.
All right, we've got a couple of additional hands up. Let's turn to Steve Linder, the treasurer for Democrats of Greater Tucson. Go right ahead.
Hi, folks. I look forward to visiting you guys again in comes January, both representing AEA Retired and DGT. It's always a pleasure to see you. But I want to talk about the flipping of the legislature. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if we are successful in flipping the House, okay, then we will have a majority of Democrats in the House, a majority of Republicans in the Senate. And what I see is a lot of good bills coming out of the House that will die in the Senate, and a lot of horrible bills that come out of the Senate that, thank God, will die in the House. And what it will do is, it seems to me, is just save the governor from vetoing 143 bills because they won't be passing. It sounds very similar to our federal Congress, how they're acting right now. Maybe you're more hopeful of some type of agreement with the Senate, but Jake Hoffman is still there in the Senate. So how do you see, even if we do flip the House, how do you see the operation going on between two houses run by two different parties?
Priya?
I want to jump in right there and say, Stephen, I'm going to correct your assumption. We are just as close to flipping the Senate as we are to flipping the House. We are one seat down in both chambers. And so it is as likely, if not more, that we flip the Senate as well. And so the Democratic trifecta is within reach. So, it's the promised land is visible. I can see it. I know we can do it, and then we can actually see our vision come to life, which is repealing all of the bad preemptions that are in there, passing some good policy. That said, it's good that you raised this issue of one house flipping and the other not, so that we can be prepared for the not as great outcome, but still better, right? Because we're not sending Governor Hobbs these terrible bills. But I would say at this juncture, let's shoot for gold, right? We absolutely can flip both houses. So I would say let's focus on that.
Yeah, specifically LD17 with Amy Fitch running, and then LD2 with Judy Schwiebert. Representative Schwiebert is running for the Senate, and I think she has a great chance of taking that seat. It was Steve Kaiser's seat who stepped down, so there's no incumbent in that seat to run.
And I'll also come back in to say that I just became co-chair of ADLCC, so I'm already spending a lot of time calling people for dollars to support our ADLCC efforts so that we are able to flip both houses. So it is very much something that I'm spending my time doing.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think as far as the question about what would happen if only one house would flip, I think that it would certainly give the Democratic caucus a much stronger position with respect to budget negotiation, at the least. And I also agree that it would Governor Hobbs again would save a lot of veto pen ink if that were to happen. But I think it would really it would fundamentally alter the budget negotiation dynamic, which would be a huge deal. It would be a huge deal in so many different ways. But that's just to answer that specific question. I just wanted to add that.
All right, we've got a question from Paul Stapleton Smith. Go ahead and unmute Paul and ask a question.
Thank you. And a question of all three panelists. Thank you so much for being here, the work that you do. The Arizona Democratic Party just passed by acclamation the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights, and it commits candidates and incumbents to very specific economic messaging in the middle of this Arizona hot strike summer. I just came back from another picket. That's what I did all weekend, and I just did it on this meeting. What do you three expect and commit to for the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights?
Well, I am a union member, so I'm all about that. I to be honest, I need to read it. I have not read it yet, but anything that has to do with labor and protecting our folks that are outside in extreme weather. We've been hearing a lot of, oh, it's always hot in Arizona. True. And it is not always as hot as it was this summer and continues to be. And all of our workers deserve safe environments, water breaks, shade, all of the things that all human beings deserve, including our unhoused population. That's a whole nother thing, Paul. But I saw your question in the chat and I was like, oh yes, we need to answer this. So I would just say, yes, I support my union brothers and sisters in their safety. I hope that you all, I do get the union dispatch, and invite us to those pickets, please. I mean, I am at school, but on weekends, I want to be out there with y'all because it is important and we need to stay together. And that's where we have strength. And, this is not just Arizona. We're seeing, with the SAG-AFTRA strike, with the writer strike, and with the Nevada teachers out on strike. I'm with you.
Right, and UAW as well. Yeah, I Paul, sign on to all of the stuff that Nancy said. Proud union member as well. And I think that there was just the various kind of scorecards are coming out, and all three of us, fortunately, have been, I think, are viewed as very strong advocates in that arena. And I think we also really view that as a fundamental part of the role of being a Democratic member from Southern Arizona.
Absolutely.
Right. Michael, I see you have your hand up, but I wanted to get a question in myself. And that is, on Friday, I went to the Arizona Youth Climate Coalition, and they held a climate strike. And they're demanding that we get off of fossil fuels and they attracted about 75 people. This is a critical issue for younger people. And, you know, Nancy, Chris, and Priya, what can we tell them? What can we offer them?
Well, I've spoken with that group, and they're the reason that our mayor and council actually have youth on that, you know, on her environmental council. That the strike that they did, the walkout of high schools a couple of years ago, she reached out to them. Mayor Romero reached out to them, and they do have a voice on her council. So I'm very proud of the work they do. And you know, they are our future. They are amazing activists who we should all learn from. So yeah, we need to listen to that, and we need to continue. And the good thing is that Tucson is a leader in the state for
Yes.
climate action, which we tell the folks in Maricopa County all the time. You know, we are kind of above average or leading the fight in climate, in housing, in all of these things. So we're very lucky to have a mayor and council who takes these values seriously and governs our city that way.
Chris, Priya, anything to add?
I was glad to attend the strike on Friday and the panel on Saturday, or the summit on Saturday, and I was on the panel, and you know, echoing what Nancy said, we have in Tucson, and we're you know, we're very fortunate to have them. And in my something that I highlighted to the students and even the other activists who are all present was, you know, in my current role, I'm ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee until we flip the legislature when I become chair. Right now, the only thing I can do is send some letters. And I sent a letter to the governor's office of resiliency recently. And I plan to engage much more with the governor's office of resiliency to make sure that we're taking executive actions on the climate emergency. But my letter was essentially to tying the heat emergency and the funds that the Office of Resiliency has received to making sure that those funds are spent in climate forward ways that move us towards grid resiliency and distributed energy models. And I pointed to the great work that the city of Tucson is doing in planning for resiliency hubs, things like that.
Chris, what would you tell young people who are concerned about climate change? You know, we're all going to be gone, but they're going to have to be living through it.
I think that as Nancy and Priya said, that the young people in Southern Arizona at least can take comfort in the fact that we are in Tucson and Pima County leaders in this area. And I think one of the you know, oftentimes when we're talking with our colleagues, I also serve on the environmental committee in the House, and you know, these things will come up, and we'll say, well, just try to if you just try to model the approach the state takes on Southern Arizona, we'll be in a lot better place. And I think one of the frustrations that we see, and I not to veer from the direct question, Larry, but is that as Priya was mentioning, there have been so many preemption bills that have come down the pike lately, and we feel like we do it well in Southern Arizona, and oftentimes we have to fight legislation to alter that and to so that we do less of a good job. I think that something else that we're fortunate in is that we have with the various stakeholder groups led by the Sierra Club, we have extraordinary advocacy in this area. And for instance, Sandy Barr of the Sierra Club, I know Priya sees her at the environmental committee ENRU hearings. We see her in the House as well. And there is it is also a group, I think maybe we're all, at least in the delegation, members of the Grand Canyon chapter of the Sierra Club, that is just has a wellspring of good ideas and of knowledge about not just water, but energy, sustainability. So I feel like we have great resources in Arizona. And of course, we also have the University of Arizona, speaking of water and all those other environmental aspects. As far as young people, I know it can be frustrating. I think we're all very frustrated with the progress that we're able to make, especially on the environmental committees in the legislature, because as Priya said, we've been able to sort of nibble around the edges a bit, and sometimes even those bills ultimately get blocked. But the big stuff, for instance, like tackling how we regulate groundwater in Arizona, gets blocked. And the only way that we're going to fix that is to flip the legislature. I would hope that young people are able to focus on that piece and to become increasingly, I know many are already, but active and engaged to help in that effort, because that really is, I think, the best way for us to have substantive change in the state of Arizona.
Okay, Mike, back over to you. I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I got a question from the chat from Jeannie Christie. There was a big political flashpoint with the Saudi Arabians pumping our groundwater to grow alfalfa and then shipping the alfalfa back to feed their horses or cows or whatever. She directed this to Priya, but any of you can weigh in on it. What do you see in terms of plans to combat such abuses of our water situation?
Happy to jump in. I think that's definitely the big story that we've been seeing for the past year or more. And the problem is, it's I think particularly offensive because we see that it's being pumped to go for export outside of our borders. But the real story is the complete lack of regulation of groundwater in our rural areas that allows anybody, any corporation from anywhere to come in and sink a deep well and pump as much water as they want and send it wherever they want. And that's true if it's a Saudi Arabian company, and that's true if it's this Minnesota-based dairy in Cochise County. The outcome is the same, that our Arizona residents are finding that their wells are drying up because anybody can come in and pump water without, any permits, without anything. And so the real problem is making sure that we are putting some regulations on groundwater pumping in those areas.
And I would add that it is, there actually are, this is an area, since it's water is a partisan issue, but it's also not, because where this is, where we see this in the sharpest focus is in our oftentimes is in our rural counties, and oftentimes the members from rural counties are Republican. My sense is, from having internal discussion, that there is an awareness that this is something that needs to change and that we need to tackle this. I think the issue that we've had, at least in the House, and I think maybe there's a similar issue in the Senate, is there's a chair of the Environmental Committee, Gail Griffin, who is just not going to hear any bill or advance any legislation that curtails the current ability to pump groundwater in rural areas. And so again, that's why it's so important to have somebody like Priya as chair rather than somebody like Gail Griffin as chair, because that's the only way to change. There is also, as Priya can speak to as well, there is power that the executive branch has on this through the Groundwater Management Act. And I think that if action isn't taken, that it may well be the case that the governor and others in the executive branch will utilize that authority in a way that never would have happened in the Ducey administration.
Right. I have another question in the chat. I think Paul could actually do it better. He's asking for a pledge, noting how well Wisconsin protected workers' rights and protections within weeks of capturing the majority there. And he'd like a pledge from you all to do the same when we capture the state legislature, as well as the governorship this coming year.
Mr. Bryan, thank you. And to be clear, it was actually Michigan, but
Michigan,
generous.
sorry. Did I say Wisconsin?
Very generous of you, brother.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you bet. That would be fantastic.
Yes, I totally agree. Absolutely.
And by the way, Paul and others, Michigan is a great example of what can happen when change happens as far as the partisan makeup, and you really are seeing it there, and they're doing a great job on that.
Yeah, they're even going to feed all of their K through 12 students lunch and breakfast every single day. So yes, that's one of my big issues that I want to tackle. So I am watching them and would love to do that as well.
Yeah, that seems like a no-brainer. Feed those kids.
You'd think,
Yeah.
but no, it is not a no-brainer. It's quite controversial.
We just learned in our Senate Democratic Caucus, I mean, while we were, our retreat today was focused on looking at those states that just flipped and took the majority and have a trifecta that we hope to have in another year, and learning from their experiences. So like in Michigan, where, they had their top priorities that they were able to get through, even with just a single seat majority. So that's absolutely where we're looking.
Well, actually, can you follow up, Priya, and say as much as you can about some of the specific proposals that you were looking at for when we have a trifecta?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll definitely, especially if we have a single seat majority, it will really depend on making sure that we have complete unity amongst our caucuses. And so, I think every one of us can tell you that, making sure that we're all on the same page is not a given. So there's some educational work, and I know Nancy in majority in leadership, has some experience with this already, and so making sure that we all kind of are, we're on the same page with what our shared values are and what we recognize that we can do immediately is going to depend on us understanding what our common shared values are, which are those common shared democratic values, but also recognizing that there are some members in those swing districts who need to feel comfortable voting for something, and we need to help bring them along so that they can message to their swing districts and not lose our majority the next cycle because of certain votes. So it's all going to be very important that even our constituents are in communication with even our Democratic members who it's swing districts, but also certain districts who've never really had to interrogate their own members, right? And really just make sure we're all on the same page so that we can make those votes.
Great points. Larry, I have another question that I'd like the panel to answer. There was mention about attacks on local control, about preemption, and I just wanted to see if any of you want to talk further at length about the hostility or threats to charter cities like Tucson in particular, and local control overall. What are your concerns? What attacks have you seen from the Republicans this session?
Well, I would just say it is, of course, so ironic that the party of small government and local control spends a significant time of their legislative agenda up in Phoenix preempting local control. And they have, and I know Priya and Nancy, I'm sure, noticed this this past session. They have a special focus on sticking it to Pima County and sticking it to Tucson. And it is just kind of an obsession that they have, and that's unfortunately the case. I think that one of the things that's kind of is an interesting nuance of the preemption argument that came up this session is there was some fantastic work done. We were talking about housing earlier, and the house we had on housing legislation. And this was an issue where we were on our side arguing that sort of for good preemption, and essentially arguing that we should have statutes in Arizona that provide certain abilities and certain safeguards for folks with respect to housing. We were, I think we all struggled with this in Southern Arizona, because as we were saying earlier, we're so far advanced as far as this stuff goes, one, just nationally, but also for the state of Arizona. And so to us, we wanted to make sure before supporting any of these really excellent housing bills that we weren't doing something that would be tying the hands of folks in Southern Arizona, in Tucson City in particular, Pima County. And so in that case, it was sort of a, I guess we don't want to have a blanket prohibition on any bill that would apply to the whole state. But what we can never support are these bills that are narrowly tailored to mess with Tucson, Southern Arizona, and oftentimes Flagstaff. It's basically, I wonder why. I wonder why that is. It's because they are, of course, counties that are majority Democratic counties. Anyway, so that was just something that came up with preemptions. I think we need to be careful not to say there can never be a bill that applies to the whole state with respect to municipalities, but it is just an obsession of theirs, and it's something we need to fight against. And again, fortunately, we're able to block those bills now that we have a Democratic governor, but we need to get in a situation where we're just not passing them at all.
Yes, I agree. And unfortunately, some of those attacks on Tucson came from our LD17 trifecta.
You bet.
Specifically, Senator Wadsack and Representative Jones, came after Tucson pretty hard, came after TUSD hard, wanting to break up TUSD into smaller districts, wanting to preempt our elections and how we do those. So, the caller is coming from within the house, as we should say. So that's a big reason to flip those seats for sure. And the three of us have a great relationship and constant contact with our mayor and council to make sure that we are hearing from them what's going on. And with those housing bills, I kept kind of saying to my friends and colleagues who were really trying to do good work for Phoenix and get people more affordable housing, Tucson is not Phoenix, and they actually came, the League of Cities and Towns did their annual conference here. And so some of those Phoenix legislators got to come and tour some of our facilities and see what work we're doing and the progressive work we're doing. And they said and posted, wow, that, you all who live in Tucson are really lucky to have the progressive thought and, what you do have. So I think it really helped them see that we are not Phoenix. And so something that might work for Greater Phoenix isn't necessarily Tucson doesn't need to have those preemptions. So.
Yeah, and I'll just go back to what Mike, I think, was teeing up, which is that, in the Senate, Senator Wadsack introduced both a bill to completely remove charter city status of cities, and thankfully that didn't go anywhere. But unfortunately, the bill that is seeking to kind of change the ways charter cities can do elections, on the Senate floor, I asked her, is there a city that is doing this that you are upset about? She said Tucson. So yeah, it's very personal. She admitted it. And unfortunately, that bill did get added to the ballot for next November. So be on the lookout.
Yeah, the governor can't veto those referendums from the legislature. Larry, it looks like we got a hand up.
All right, Lillian Fox again. Go ahead, Lillian, ask your question.
Am I wrong? Is there some question about where Wadsack actually lives? Does she really live in LD17, or is she really living in someplace else?
Who knows?
Well, I mean, is that a question? Am I remembering that right? That where she actually lives is questionable?
You are. Definitely.
Yeah, That was questioned. Yes, it sure was.
Her primary opponent did a lawsuit against her, but I mean, the courts are very lenient with residency, and so like residency is a state of mind basically. So it's not really like an actual bar to her serving in the position.
Yeah, because she's truly horrible.
Yeah, I think this session definitely established that. Larry, I see we're coming up at the end of the scheduled time. Are we able to extend if people are interested in staying on and continuing to talk for a few more minutes? Can we
sure.
impose on the representative and the senator?
Let's do that. And I feel it's my time right now to encourage everybody to stop yelling at the TV and get out there and get active. There are so many different things that you can do for the Democratic Party. You don't have to go out at 100 when it's 108 degrees out and knock on doors. You can offer your nice big air-conditioned car to some young person who will go out and knock on doors. And we have postcard parties. We have all sorts of get-togethers. We have fundraisers. But the point is, you just can't sit on your hands anymore. You've got to find some way to get active, because all it takes for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Well, let's go to Paul. He has asked, go ahead, Paul, tell us more.
Indeed. And of course, we could go on and on about Arizona Hot Strike Summer, because there's more strikes coming. And I want to know that our Dem folks are walking those picket lines and that they're truly announcing publicly, we stand with our workers, because our political campaigns, of course, are committed to getting you reelected. You guys all know that. Having said that, voter registration, Larry, I'm so glad you jumped on. What we can do right now in LD18, actually in critical districts across the state, I'm throwing everything, I'm a political director of my union, right? Is registration. We can change the outcomes if we register people. And to your point, brother, I know it's hot out there. I'm walking picket lines in that heat. However, there are more than one way to register voters. Over at Pima County, they're killing it at the University of Arizona. They're doing 60, 70, 80, 100 voters a day. But we have to focus on it. And I really want all of our Democratic legislators to be beating the drum and blowing the horns. And that's my question. I'm sorry, I'm editorializing. Will all of you commit to leading voter registration efforts in your districts? Because you all know we can win those up ballot. Every down ballot vote is an up ballot. And that's what I don't know about our Democrats in the state legislature. Will they actually change the registration map? That is a question. Or will they go, well, statistically, we're just not going to win in pick the district. And right? What are your thoughts on that? And that's the dynamism of Democrats in the legislature now that you guys are leaders in, right? And I mean that truly.
I mean, I'm working with Persistence Arizona, and we're doing some voter registration at Tucson High in the next few weeks. So yes, absolutely. And I'm encouraging, schools across the valley to do that. So yeah, absolutely. I can't speak to the Democratic Party, but I mean, if we could get 18 to 25-year-olds to register and vote, we would have a completely different electorate. Yep.
Let me specify the subtext there, I think, and Paul can correct me if I'm wrong, but he's too polite to say. Priya, can you weigh in on this as a leader in the ADLCC regarding single shotting? Because it sounds like he might be questioning the wisdom of doing a single shot in LD17. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's a question for Priya, because now she's a leader, part of the leadership team there at ADLCC. So Priya, would you like to weigh in on that?
Sure. I mean, I think that voter registration is important everywhere. It's not like necessarily ADLCC or specifically LD17. And I was thinking, actually, as Paul was talking, that the three of us are blessed to have such an active and engaged LD that is the model for every LD in the state. And ADLCC does have this program where the LDs are sharing information amongst themselves. And I know that when our LD is represented there, it's really to be able to share our good work and how, you know, we have such high voter turnout in LD18. And so, you know, in terms of our own LDs, I think we're sitting pretty, but yeah, we absolutely have a lot of work to do with registering voters across the state and supporting efforts that are focused on that, like Nancy said, with the youth. And I think all of these efforts build on themselves, right? It's, you know, there's also the reproductive rights petition, the Arizona for Abortion Access petition that's coming out soon. And that's going to be a huge effort of gathering signatures. And it's also, oh, well, you're not registered to vote yet. Well, let's figure that out. Right? It's all going to build on itself. I don't think it necessarily, I think the single shot is more of an electoral strategy, and that definitely, I think, is borne out by the data and the strategy and the analysis that's been done. And thankfully, LD17 spotted. Sorry if I'm breaking up.
Yeah, you sound a little weird, but I think we got all that for you.
Well, I just want to encourage everybody to get out there and find out what legislative district you're in. That's the that's the easy way to start. I'm going to put that in the chat right now, where you can go to look up what district you're in or which LD, because action happens at the LD level. And LD17 is not the only LD that we can flip to the Democratic side. There's 21, there's 23, there's a number of districts. Find out what district you're in and then contact the chairperson. Just go to their website and you'll find out who the chairperson is and tell them you want to get active and tell them what you like to do. You know, do you like to write letters to the editor? LD18 has a letter to the editor brigade. We get all kinds of letters published in the paper. Contact, you know, someone who is in a campaign, a Democrat running in a red district. Call them up and say, what can I do for you? Sure, I want to donate, but you know, that's not enough anymore. You've got to donate, but you've got to be active. And if you take anything away from this meeting tonight is tomorrow morning, I want you to start getting active and make a difference in society. Change the world for a better place.
I haven't seen any other questions. I've seen a lot of love for the representatives. Specifically, Teresa Gershout says that she loves the dynamic between you. You work so beautifully together, and that you serve your LD beyond expectations. And she, you know, continues to support you in every way she can, and encourages others to do so. So, some beautiful sentiments there. I have a question more about the dark side of Republican rule. Specifically the special committee on appointments and abuse of various rules there in the House and Senate. I was wondering if the three of you could weigh in on those issues and how the Republicans are abusing their power in your view. Yeah, just an open comment on that.
I guess I would say this may be Priya may be best to answer this, since this vetting committee, this Star Chamber committee, Jake Hoffman committee, which is called, the notion is that it's a vetting committee, but really it's a committee that's designed to block the governor's nominees and prevent the governor from staffing up her administration. And we just had an example of this past week. And so it's another example of how the Freedom Caucus and really just the majority in the legislature as a whole has given up trying to perform the basic functions of government. And I think we've ever had this situation, even in Arizona before, where the governor is unable to have administration because of this purely sort of spiteful political Star Chamber type entity that has been set up in the Senate. It's a whole different way to vet nominees than we've ever done before. And Priya can speak to this, but as I understand it, in the past, it's been The committee of jurisdiction is the committee that will vet whatever the nominee happens to be. If it's somebody who does healthcare stuff, then it's HHS is the committee. If it's somebody who has is involved in the environmental portfolio, then it's NRU that's supposed to be the vetting entity. That has been thrown out the window. And in the Senate, there's just this sort of basically single guy, Jake Hoffman, who's, you know, nutty as a fruitcake. And he has this effective veto over who the governor gets to put in these roles, even though she was constitutionally elected, and that's her duty. And I'm sure Nancy and Priya can both weigh in as well.
I totally agree with what you said. It's a power grab, and it's exactly why we can't allow the Republicans to have the majority.
Right.
Yeah, Chris described it pretty well. I mean, when they made this rule change this year, and I spoke up against it because, yeah, tradition was that the committee of jurisdiction was able to, you know, apply their expertise and knowledge to vetting the nominees. And it really goes to show that the Senate especially is governed by the Freedom Caucus. You know, the President Peterson, I actually say President Hoffman sometimes because Jake Hoffman, what Jake Hoffman says tends to go. He is the chair of the Freedom Caucus. He is chair of this nominations committee, and you know, more times than not, that they haven't actually moved very expeditiously on all of the governor's nominees. They've only probably held 6 or 7 hearings so far, and when they have, it has really been a hit job. So it just underlines, if anyone had any doubt that they are operating in a political purpose, the last 2 nomination hearings really underlined it.
Yeah, for anybody who's not familiar, could you tell us a little bit about those 2 last nominees that were ditched?
Yeah, absolutely. So this very last one was this past week. Joan Service, who's been tapped to run the housing department. She comes from a housing background. She's focused on affordable housing. She really is well pedigreed, and the committee found some kind of very weird nitpicky reason to claim that she was plagiarizing something, and therefore they were going to vote her nomination down. But it was a vote in search of a reason to vote her down. It was not a very strong argument. And then similarly, right before the one right before that was Martin Quesada, who, if we all remember, he ran for treasurer in the 22 election, former senator, progressive champion, and it was clear that they held that against him because they had worked with him in the Senate, and again, brought some specious arguments to bear about and tried to, in the way that they are focused on drag shows and groomers, they in his case tried to bring this kind of DEI and CRT kind of claim against him and claim that he was racist for some of the progressive stances that he was championing.
Yeah, that was crazy. I was really amused by the comment that the nominee made that it was today that she learned that putting, something that somebody else wrote into a letter to a government agency constituted plagiarism. It was very amusing.
Yeah.
And unfortunate. Looks like Lillian Fox has her hand up. You want to call on her, Larry?
Lillian, go right ahead, unmute, ask a question.
I had a question. Is LD18 a district that's considered safe for Democrats, that you really don't expect much competition from the Republicans? The reason I ask is traditionally I will pass out leaflets door to door for the TUSD candidates I'm supporting. And last time around, I couldn't get anything from you guys. So I passed out TUSD candidate stuff in LD18 neighborhoods, and I had nothing to pass out for you, and I would have happily done it for you. And I passed out TUSD stuff in other LDs with their candidates, Democratic candidates materials. So are you a
Well,
safe district?
we are, but we were all out pounding the pavement, knocking on doors, and we also carried for, I mean, I carried for TUSD, carried for Kathy Hoffman, carried for everyone. So I'm not sure. And all of LD18 had our lit, and they were knocking on doors. So I don't know, Lillian. I'm sad to hear that, because I know that, I mean, my shoes
I
were
know.
worn out. We were
I
knocking on doors.
understand, and that's why I would have been glad to carry your literature, and I didn't.
Yeah.
I live in an apartment. I've lived in apartments for 30 years in Tucson. I have never gotten literature from a single Democratic, a leaflet from a single Democratic candidate. Also, a friend of mine who is in the same situation, she lives in a condo. She passed out literature in her condo and had nothing to pass out for you guys. And I think the apartments and the condos get overlooked. And I had
Absolutely.
printouts that showed who the registered voters were. So I wasn't giving it out to any old person, just to registered people.
Well,
Anyway, I'm
it's
done.
all gonna
Great.
change in the
Yeah.
coming days in LD18. We are making a concerted effort to reach people in apartment buildings. The problem with them, of course, is many of them have locked entrances and you can't get in. So our way around that is we're gonna do what is called distributed lists. It's a method of using the VAN, the Voter Action Network, to send texts to people who live in apartment buildings. So we're going to make sure that we catch them all. And I heartily encourage you to come to our LD18 meeting on October 26th and find out how you can get involved in all the different things that you can do. Because we have literature for Priya and Nancy and Chris, and I went out in the heat myself and distributed them door to door. I took every opportunity I could get to speak up for them. And so if you're ever, short of materials, just contact Priya, Nancy, or Chris Mathis, come to an LD18 meeting, and you'll find out lots of ways to get the
Yeah,
message
absolutely.
to your neighbors.
Yeah, Lily, we would, whatever happened last time, we will definitely fix that. And I'm sorry that it happened last time. I think it also, in the call of your question, was I think that LD18 is considered a more or less safe Democratic district. Last time our big race was in the primary. At this point in time, there isn't a primary opponent, but we may have one, and so we may be doing that again. Regardless of any of that, we were just talking a little bit today and over the past week about getting our campaigns going and kind of getting that ball rolling. I would also say that one of the things we hope to be able to do, regardless of how it plays out in LD18, is really provide strong support in LD17, because that's just, it's close. It should be easy for us as candidates, and also for some of our LD18 folks to assist up there. And we're talking about voter registration earlier and how important that is. But just the kind of, as Nancy was saying, as Larry was saying, pounding the pavement and getting out there as far as making sure people understand in LD17 what quality candidates we have and what nuts they currently have representing them is so important. And it really is the best opportunity we've had in 60 years to flip both the House and the Senate.
Yeah, it seems like
it's true that LD18 was represented by a Republican not that long ago, within the last 10 years. What the redistricting committee has done is pack them all into LD18. They took Democratic precincts in the southeastern part of the district and attached them all to LD18, and they did the same thing in the northwestern district. So yeah, LD18 is the Democratic powerhouse, and until redistricting comes in another 10 years, it's going to remain that way. But there's no sitting on our hands in LD18. We are, when the time comes, we're going to be supporting Priya, Nancy, and Chris 100%.
Well, and
Thank you.
also, Larry, just to know how important it is, 2024, we have the Reproductive Rights Initiative, we have a presidential cycle, and in our statewide elections, Pima County turnout is key to electing Democrats. So it's
Absolutely.
you know, it's vital that we get out, as we all know, but just to note that.
Let me make a suggestion here that if you're in a strong Democratic district, one of the things you can do that would really help is to pick, a neighboring district or a nearby district or county that's not as strong, and hold fundraisers, hold events for those candidates so they get their faces out there amongst Democrats. Like Keith Seaman, who has joined us here this evening, noted that he has several hundred constituents from Pima County himself, and considers himself a Southern Arizona legislator. So, people like that whose territory overcrosses with us, we can be very helpful in helping those people keep their seats or capture seats. For instance, we recently had Ann Carl on, who's running for registrar in Cochise County, and that would be an excellent way to spend some of your time and energy, is to have a house party or a fundraiser or make a donation to Ann Carl's campaign, because she's running against one of the worst deniers of election reality in the Republican recorder there, who is going to try and throw a spanner in the works in 24, because he's going to be overseeing an election there in Cochise County, and it's a travesty.
So I hate to be the one to say that our time is up, but I'm starving, and I have to prepare for my teaching evaluation tomorrow morning. So as fun as this has been, as grateful as I am, I gotta eat, y'all.
We understand. Nancy, thank you so much for coming. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you for all of your support, all of the great questions. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and for being so flexible and changing it from earlier today to now. I'm so grateful.
You're very welcome. Thanks for joining us.
You bet.
I have a follow-up question for the remaining representative and senator, and it's a chance to whinge a bit if you feel like doing so. And that's, has there been a time during this session when you feel like your privileges and rights as a representative, a democratically elected representative, has been infringed by the Republicans, either in committee or in the COW or any other time during your service, where you feel like the rules or the chairperson of that particular meeting just trampled on your rights as an elected representative of the people?
I can go first. Also, my phone is at 2%, so I might just die. My phone might just die. I won't. I'm going to stay focused on the road. But yeah, so I previously mentioned the fight over the school for deaf and blind. And, we fought really hard in committee to re-extend that reauthorization bill, because it just made no sense. I was crying in committee because of the heartfelt testimony of the students and alumni of that program. And it was just so completely devastating, disappointing, frustrating that the Republicans were unmoved. They just didn't re-extend it, and then passed out of committee with just a 2-year extension. And then we got to the Senate floor, and they're like, oh, okay, you know what? Why don't we compromise? We'll give you a 4-year. We'll extend it for 4 years, and we're supposed to be happy about that. Like, it's a really great thing that they extended it. And so we prepared, and we submitted amendments to extend it for the full 8 or for 10 years, which they weren't having. And we're in the minority, so often our only power is our voice and speaking up. And so I tried to speak up about it and talk about how the reasoning that they were offering for limiting it to the 2 or even the 4 years was ableist, because they were saying that the school for deaf and blind needed added oversight for their own good, really. And where I felt like this was a moment where I felt like I was, even that my right to be able to speak up was limited and unfairly because I was cut off. My mic was cut off. They were claiming I was impugning others by saying that the reasoning offered was ableist. So I wasn't able to give, any sort of speech. The moment I said this is ableist to be doing this, they cut off my mic. And so I felt like that was a very blunt use of their authority in the majority.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, Chris, we'll come up. Go ahead and wrap up for us, Chris.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, there are, the hard part is sort of picking the example because there's so many examples. But one of the things I think that made me probably the angriest from a procedural standpoint that occurred in the House, and I think there's a similar version in the Senate, was at some point, I don't know, a month or a month and a half into session, the majority announced that for our bills on our side, the handful of bills that get through, not only did they have to get a committee hearing, get voted out of committee, and have, in order to get voted out of committee, by definition, the way the committees are made up, it means you have to have Republican support for the bill. Otherwise, they don't get a hearing and they don't get out of committee. So even for the handful of bills that we had that were like that, they then moved the goalpost once again and said that we needed to have a sort of version of what you've heard of in the federal system called the Hastert rule, where we had to have, it wasn't enough that we had 31 votes for a bill, we had to have a majority of the majority. And so they were making our members go around and talk to every member of the majority and to get 16 of them to commit to a vote for the bill before they would bring it up on the board. And what all of the members of the majority that people would talk to would say is, oh, I'm happy to be number 16 maybe, but I'm not going to be number 1. And so it effectively made it impossible for us to pass legislation. And that was infuriating. We, for I think about a week or so, just said, okay, we're not going to vote on any bills if that's the case. And gradually that got worked out. But I mean, effectively, I think there is still that as the Senate too, where it's, unless there's a majority of the Republican caucus, they're not going to bring anything up for a vote. So that was one of the most infuriating among many.
Well, let me close tonight's meeting by saying, Chris and Priya, I just want you to know that we have your back. We're going to support you. Don't lose heart. Be persistent. Just keep doing what you're doing and, carry on. And with that, folks, I think we need to end the meeting. And I just want to say thank you all for coming. Look forward to seeing you at the luau being sponsored to raise funds for Kirsten Engel. And that will be on October 21. More information to come. And with that, let's give a round of applause to all of our wonderful LD18 representatives. Thank you so much.